focus on generating more jobs and helping heal the economy, I'd ask the gentleman in return, what does he do, or what is his suggestion about helping those businesses? Because as we know, the preponderance of the jobs created come from those small businesses $200,000 and up. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. Of course, we have this discussion on a regular basis. I'm sure everybody in America looks forward to this discussion. Obviously, when the gentleman talks about small businesses, he is essentially talking about 3% of the small businesses in America. Because 97% of the small businesses, those job creators of which the gentleman speaks, 97% of them make less than the and would be positively affected by the bill that affects those under 200,000 individually and 250,000 collectively. And of course, 100% of the small businesses would be assured, let's say they make 350, they would be assured that the first 250,000 would not get a tax increase. So I tell the gentleman I am concerned about those small businesses, and small businesses will be included in the under 250,000 and under 200,000 as well. 100% of America, no matter how much they make, would have the assurance that the first 250,000 or 200,000 if they are individuals and not families, that they would not get any tax increase. The gentleman, particularly in the election cycle of 2010, talked a lot about, and I agreed with him, about bringing confidence, certainty of what the tax structure and what the rules would be. I suggest to the gentleman, small businesses, whether they be in the 97% or the 3%, the 97% being affected by the bill that I would like to see passed, that I think the Senate's passed, but the other 3%, as I say, would be positively affected, knowing full well that the first 250,000 of income would not see any increase in their taxes. I think that would be a positive step for those small businesses and the small businesses above and below those figures. And I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman again, and I think, as the gentleman has heard me say before, the majority of business income comes from those small businesses with incomes over $200,000. And the higher the percentage of income derived from a small business, the more jobs are created by that individual. And that is the point. We also know, and the gentleman's heard me recite these figures before, there was a third-party outside study conducted which would indicate that if the gentleman's proposal is passed, that we are going to see the reduction of 700,000 jobs going forward. And again, if the focus is on jobs, as it should be, it raises certain concerns. I would also remind the gentleman, he and I both feel very strongly about trying to do something about the fiscal health of the federal government in attempts to try and heal the economy. And the fiscal health of the government has much more to do about getting control of the spending rather than bringing more revenue in. More revenue in can come if we grow the economy, but just by statically increasing tax rates without doing anything to try and address the spending problem will actually make the problem worse and will leave that mountain of debt untouched. And as the gentleman knows, our Speaker has tried and tried to get the White House engaged in actually discussing specifics the way those specifics were discussed a year and a half ago. And these kind of things that we all know need to be done on the entitlement programs, the White House needs to come forward and say that they'll join us in trying to fix the problem. And that is what we have not seen. We have seen, Mr. Speaker, Speaker Boehner go forward and put revenues on the table and said we asked the White House to join us in trying to fix the problem on spending, and that's where things have stopped. And hopefully we can resolve that. And as the gentleman knows, I'm committed, and as we have announced in the schedule, to staying here until we can resolve the problem. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. And I agree with him, as he knows, staying here until we get this problem solved. America expects it. America, more importantly, needs it. And the economy needs the confidence of a resolution of this stalemate. So I agree 100% with the gentleman. But let me say, in terms of, again, one of the disquieting factors is that we can't even act on that on which we agree. Now, the gentleman and I disagree on a proposition, and that is the gentleman believes and cites a study which we think is of questionable validity that says we're going to lose jobs if we raise taxes on those above $250,000. We don't share that view, and most economists that I talk to don't share that view. But there is a study that the gentleman refers to that says that. I understand that. And what I'm saying is we can vote on that, and some of us will agree and some of us will disagree. But if we can't vote on it, let me call the attention to somebody who's certainly not a Democratic spinmeister, but I think that the perception will be that what we are doing is holding the better off, if we can't help them, that we can't help those who are not making as much money. David Brooks, I'm sure you're aware of David Brooks' column in the New York Times, right? Not a liberal Democrat or not a Democrat. I don't think he's a Democrat or Republican, but a more conservative columnist says this, and I quote from the New York Times just a few days ago, "Sometimes you have to walk through the desert to get to the promised land." This is a quote. "A budget stalemate will confirm every bad Republican stereotype. Republicans will be raising middle-class taxes in order to serve the rich, hurting Sam's Clubs to benefit the country club. If Republicans do this, they might as well get Mitt Romney's 47% comments printed on T-shirts and wear them for the rest of their lives." I use that quote not to criticize, but to say that the perception, I think, is if we do not act on something on which we agree, we are not doing so because we want to make sure that the best off, if they're not helped, nobody will be helped. And I think that's not good for the country. I think, frankly, it's not good for the Congress. Not necessarily Republicans or Democrats. I think we're all perceived as either having the ability to act or not act. If we're going to get this fiscal cliff resolved, it will be because we agree on that on which we can agree. Here we do. And we have 167 CEOs who have written to us saying that the Business Roundtable agrees that we ought to move in this direction. Bob Corker, Senator Corker, said that just the other day. Others have said that as well. And I really don't think it's either a political gotcha or a political advantage. I just think it will do what the gentleman talked about. It will give confidence to 98% of the American people who pay taxes that they don't have to worry on January 1st about their taxes going up. It seems to me that's a positive for our economy because it will give them confidence that they're going to have resources to do some of the things that will help our economy grow. I understand the gentleman's position is that there'll be 2% who won't have that confidence and 3% of small businesses who, as the gentleman points out, those 3% are relatively large businesses in the sense that that 3% gets 53% of the business income. He's correct. Those are large small businesses or, in many cases, individuals who just make a lot of money. And that's fine. But they're not the majority of, I think, the job creators in terms of the numbers of small businesses who add 1 or 2 or 3 people to their rolls. We can get off this, but I certainly will yield to the gentleman and hope that we can do that. The reason you've gotten the suggestion of the 2-bill strategy, 2-bill scenario, because that gives everybody in the House of Representatives, and you talked about this, particularly in 2010, but have talked about it since then, of giving the House of Representatives the opportunity to work its will. 2 bills, if you move them forward, one which the President says he will sign, one which the President says he will veto, and after all, he's going to be our President for the next 50 months, we can get something done. And at the same time, all 435 members, or 433 I think we have presently, can express their views on those issues on which we have agreement and those issues on which we have a disagreement. I yield to my friend.
I'd say, gentlemen, you know, on issues that we have agreement on, I think the gentleman and I both have agreement on many of the spending issues. I think the gentleman has been outspoken in his commitment to say, hey, we've got to modernize, if you will, the age eligibility of some of our entitlement programs. I think the gentleman, if I'm correct, has said that he is in support of adjusting the age eligibility for Medicare.
If the gentleman will yield, just
Yes.
let me correct. What I've said is, and I've said everything needs to be on the table. Not that I agreed with everything that would be on the table, and I have some very substantial reservations about age increase. Particularly, it was in the Ryan bill. It doesn't get you any money in the next 10 years, so it will not help us get to that fiscal crisis. What I've said, and I'll repeat, is you have the right to put everything on the table. We have a right to put everything on the table. If you're going to have an honest negotiation, we ought to consider everybody's point of view. That's what I've said.
And I'd say to the gentleman, this is exactly the kind of conversation that we should be having about fixing the problem rather than just kicking the can. And again, the gentleman has been very upfront about, I think, his commitment to do some of those more difficult political things that I agree with him on. But unfortunately, we're not having those conversations, and we're not having those conversations because I believe there are others in his party in the House and elsewhere, as certainly in the White House, that refuse to engage in the specifics about how we address the mountain of debt and the continuing spiraling upwards of spending. And that is what we've got to do. I think the gentleman would say, without running the risk of putting words in his mouth, that many folks out there who are wealthy would say, sure, I'll pay more taxes. But I would say back to those individuals, I believe that you say that because you would trust that your money is being spent to pay down the debt and the deficit. That's what we're trying to get to. None of us on this side of the aisle believe raising taxes is good in this economy or something that we should do by feeding more money into the federal government. And certainly the federal government is not fixing the problem. That's what we're trying to do, Mr. Speaker, and I know the gentleman understands my point of view on this, and we've had this discussion continuously, so I yield back.
And I thank the gentleman for his comments. It is a discussion the country's having. It's a discussion we need to have, and we need to have it honestly with one another. And the gentleman knows my position. It's not taxes or spending. It's if you buy something, pay for it. We haven't done that. That's what creates debt. Taxing doesn't create debt. Spending doesn't create debt if you pay for it. Spending creates debt only if you don't pay for it. The revenues, taxes, are what you pay for things you buy. We are buying things and we're not paying for them. And your children and mine are being put in debt as a result. So this debate is really about what are we going to pay for? How much do we want to do? And if we want to do it, we need to pay for it. The gentleman knows my side very much believes that we had 2 tax cuts in 01 and 03. We didn't pay for them. We had 2 wars, both of which I supported, as the gentleman knows. We didn't pay for them. We passed a prescription drug bill. We didn't pay for it. We're hopefully going to pass a disaster relief bill that hopefully we're not going to pay for in the short term, but that we will pay for and have a scenario to pay for in the longer term, because we owe that to our children and to our grandchildren.
Will the gentleman yield?
But paying, I'll just make the point. The gentleman always talks about tax and spending is the problem. The problem is we vote to buy things, whatever those things are, and we haven't voted to pay for them. The discipline in any system, in the family's budget, in the country's budget, should be is if you want to buy it, have the discipline to pay for it, or at least to amortize it, to pay for it over a series of years that you plan for. We haven't done that. We're in a debate about this fiscal cliff of how to do that. We planned this fiscal cliff. This is not a happenstance. We planned, I didn't vote for the tax bills, but they sunsetted. They sunsetted this December 31st. That was planned. It was planned because of a scoring issue. Not because I think your side really believed they ought to sunset, but because of a scoring issue. The fact of the matter is the sequester was put in place as a fail-safe to make the super committee work. It didn't work. So on January 2nd, sequester takes place. I don't think any of us believe the sequester ought to take place in the way that it's planned to do so. So what I'm saying to the gentleman is everything that's going to happen on December 31st, we've planned. we put in place. We've sunsetted. It's our responsibility to meet that. And yes, taxes is the way we pay for things that we buy, because if we pay for them, we don't create debt. And I'll be glad to yield.
Mr. Speaker, along those lines, the gentleman talked about the 01-03 tax cuts. He is talking about mostly the 98% that he refers to that continue to need that tax cut. And I'd ask the gentleman, is he now saying we need to pay for that tax cut?
I absolutely believe that we need to pay for that tax cut over the 10-year plan that we try to come up with to get us to a place that we can agree on being the objective in 2022 or 2023 as to where we want to be as a country in terms of fiscal sustainability. A credible plan that will get us from here to there, including taking cognizance of the cost of that tax cut. Yes, I am saying that over the longer term we ought to pay for it. Right now, the economy is struggling. The reason I think none of us want to raise taxes on the average working men and women in this country, because the economy is still struggling. We're going to have that issue in terms of the payroll tax. We did the payroll tax deduction, which is controversial and hasn't been a lot of the discussion, in order to get some additional revenues, 2% cut in the FICA tax, actually a third of the cut and a third of the FICA tax, so that we could get additional monies in the pockets of consumers so they could continue to buy. The economy has been better than it certainly was. We have grown, but not to the extent that we need to, and that is why our view is that for those working Americans, we ought to continue that level, but not because we think that we ought to just put that on the credit card and forget about it. It's got to be part of this fiscal cliff negotiations, and your point is making sure we pay for things.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I said to the gentleman, I know the gentleman understands that my view is you don't have to pay for giving people back the money that they earn, but the gentleman takes that view. But that's exactly the point of these discussions. Where is the discussion about the specifics on where we are paying for things in terms of reducing spending? That's exactly the point. If the gentleman would be so kind as to go to the White House and engage the President to say, hey, give us some specifics, because the President so desperately wants to raise those taxes and to grant the 98% the tax relief, and if the gentleman's contention is the President's, where are the specifics on the other side of the ledger? That's exactly what we're saying, Mr. Speaker. We need to solve this problem.
We had that, thank you for reclaiming my time, we had that discussion in terms of specifics, and I pointed out to the gentleman last week, and I'll point out to him again today, and the President has in his budget 23 pages of cuts, including, very frankly, with respect to Medicare, in which he cuts more specifically identified than Paul Ryan's budget that passed this House reduced Medicare expenditures. So I will say to my friend, you know, I've given this little list, he can't see it. You have 5 items on your proposal in the letter that you sent. 5 items. They're over here on the right, 5 line items, all conclusionary, no specifics. For instance, the gentleman refers to $800 billion, not the gentleman, but in the offer, the Republican offer, refers to $800 billion in revenues. Now, the President's been very specific as what he thinks we ought to do in revenues. We ought to go to the Clinton rates on those over $200,000 individually and over $250,000 family. Very specific. And he's made other specific proposals that get him to his revenue number. Frankly, your revenue number is posited on the fact that we're going to reduce, as I understand it, preference items to attain an additional $800 billion in revenue without increasing rates. I understand that general proposition. Would the gentleman tell me which preference items you would reduce to get to the 800? Now, that's a little rhetorical, because I don't want to put you on the spot on that, but it is to the extent I don't think you have been specific in terms of your offer at all, while I do believe the President has put forward, both on the tax side and the spending side, some very specific proposals to how to get to his numbers. And I yield to my friend.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Speaker. And I would say this. I mean, this is, again, the gentleman has been very good, not in the negotiations with the Speaker and the President, but somehow knowing the state of affairs. Because this is the problem. If the gentleman says that we ought to look to the President's budget proposals as our guide as to what he would accept and propose on the specifics, just yesterday, I think the news came that the administration has now decided not to uphold its commitment on the Medicaid reduction in spending. And so what are we to believe as far as the President's proposals in his budget from months and months ago, and how that applies to the discussions and negotiations around the fiscal cliff, which is exactly why we need the specifics now. And I understand and take the gentleman's point as far as the $800 billion. But we have not dealt at all with the spending side of the ledger. And the commitment should be balanced. As the President always says, we need a balanced approach. But yet, we don't have any discussion on the spending side of the ledger other than to reference a prior proposal by the administration, which administration now has said, no, we're not sticking to that on the Medicaid piece. So what are we to believe? Which is exactly the point. We need real specificity in terms of the spending, and I take the gentleman's point on the $800 billion, yes, but it takes two sides, and this White House and President have refused on the spending side. And I yield back.
Well, of course, again, we have a disagreement, and here, this list, I can't read it either, so you couldn't read it from
if
here.
If the gentleman would yield, we've just seen the administration backtrack on its commitment on that list.
I don't think he backtracked. What he said was, and what we have said continually is, on the revenue side, if you're going to have a balanced package, on the revenue side, this is his specific proposal. He's made a number of proposals on the spending cut side already. As I said, in Medicare, more than the Ryan budget had in his budget. The fact is, I will tell you, Mr. Gentleman, you have no specificity on balance, nor do you have any specificity, frankly, on cuts. There's no specificity on your spending cuts here. They're conclusions. So I'm not sure how you think one side ought to be specific, i.e. the President, which I think he has been specific, and the other side comes with 5 lines of dollars that add up to $2.2 trillion, none of which have any as you see, there are no individual items below those 5 lines saying where you want to cut or raise revenues. Therefore, I think we need to get to an agreement. And this argument is not very helpful, I think. We need to get to an agreement. Both sides need to get to agreement. But the reason we get into this conversation is we have agreement on a part of that which will help give confidence to our people. And that is on the middle class taxes not going up. I would again urge, and then perhaps we can get off this subject because I don't think we're really enlightening our public very much, other than the fact there are obviously disagreements. But they expect us, and we need to bridge these disagreements. I think the President has shown, you and I participated in discussions with the President of the United States, and I've been here 31 years. No President in the 31 years I've been here has spent as much time sitting in the Oval Office discussing with you and I and others, Mr. Boehner, Ms. Pelosi, Mr. Reid, Mr. McConnell, and others, sitting in the office trying to get to specific agreements. This President is willing to do that, and he has done it. He's shown that he's willing to do it in 2011, and you and I were in the room watching it happen. Now, did it result in what we wanted, and that was an agreement? It did not. That's unfortunate. But this President is willing to do it. Hopefully both sides are willing to do both sides of the ledger, which the gentleman points out, revenues and spending, balanced package, getting us to where we need to be. Now, I'll move on to another subject unless the gentleman wants to make another point. Okay, debt ceiling. I'm very worried about the debt ceiling, Mr. Leader. I think the debt ceiling is something that you and I have expressed publicly and privately ought not to be something that really we put at risk. I frankly think all the leaders that I've talked to on the Republican side and on the Democratic side think that when you incur debts as the United States of America, the most creditworthy nation on the face of the earth, that you have every intention of paying those debts. The debt ceiling theoretically says you can't pay over a certain number. You can't go into debt any more. You and I both know that sometime in February, maybe later, that debt ceiling will be reached. Very frankly, both parties have played a game on the debt ceiling. When you were in charge, we played the fact that the debt was your problem because you'd cut taxes and didn't pay for that. On your side, you said we spent too much money and we didn't pay for that. And so you voted against the debt ceiling when we were in charge. Neither one of us have, I think, covered ourselves with a great deal of glory on that issue. The debt ceiling has to be raised because America will pay its bills. America will be creditworthy. And we saw the last time we had this political, I call it a charade or dance, the last time, for the first time in history, first time since you and I have served here, history's a lot longer than that, the credit of the United States of America was downgraded by one of the rating agencies, Standard & Poor's. I would hope that the debt ceiling would not be a subject of disagreement. The President has proposed Senator McConnell's proposal so that the party in charge can take responsibility for it. The McConnell proposal said that the President of the United States would say, look, in order to pay our bills, we have to raise our debt ceiling. Most countries don't have a debt ceiling, of course. Most families don't have a debt ceiling. They incur a debt, they expect to pay it. I would hope that this would not be a subject of political leveraging or political disagreement. We know as an economic fact of life that we're going to have to increase the debt limit. And I would ask the gentleman if he has any thoughts on that and when we might act on that. Yield to my friend. I don't think I finished what, for anybody who happens to be watching us is not bored stiff by this point in time. The McConnell proposal, as the gentleman knows, was that the President would propose a level, and then if that were not rejected by 2/3 of each House, that it then would go into effect, which would mean that the President of the United States, Republican or Democrat, would take the responsibility for making that judgment on behalf of managing the finances of our country. And I yield to my friend.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I believe that, in all fairness, looking at the credit rating agencies and their view towards debt ceiling increase discussions, some of that certainly has to do with the continuing increasing of debt and its burden on this country, our citizens, and its economy. And if the gentleman recalls a year and a half ago when we were engaged in the discussions around the increase of the debt ceiling, we established a proposition which said that if we're going to increase the debt ceiling, we ought to be decreasing the spending in a commensurate amount. Very simply put. The difficulty was we could not get the gentleman's party and or the White House to go along with us in terms of agreement of those spending reductions. It's an echo of the original discussion the gentleman and I just had as far as the fiscal cliff is concerned. Our commitment is to trying to reduce the mountain of debt that is strangling this country and in trying to stop the spending that continues to spiral out of control. So any discussion of the increase of debt for us has to be accompanied with a real commitment to the reduction in spending. Otherwise, those credit rating agencies are going to continue to do what they did. And so in order to engender confidence in those agencies and the markets and throughout the American economy and the public, we have got to gain some credibility on the spending issue and stop the spending. That is our position. The gentleman knows that. Yes, we all agree America is a country that pays its bills. We need to stop racking up so many of them because we've gotten to a situation where we are generating $1 trillion of additional annual debt. We can't do that. And that's why we take the position we do. to try and arrest that, to get our economy back on an even keel so we can heal that economy. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I don't think he answered my question about the debt limit. Therefore, my presumption is, unfortunately, that it will continue to be an item used as leverage, holding hostage the creditworthiness of the United States to this debate.
Gentlemen, yield.
I'd be glad to yield.
That is a mischaracterization of my remarks, Mr. Speaker. All I said was we feel that this White House has a tin ear in terms of the spending problem. And what we're saying is we need some balance. Just as the rhetoric comes from the White House that we need a balanced approach, we need a balanced approach on both sides, spending and revenue. That's what the whole discussion is about on the debt ceiling issue, because it is accessing additional funds for the federal government instead of through taxation, but borrowing. But equally, if we're going to increase that, we better be decreasing the other side of the ledger so we don't continue to increase and mount that debt. I yield back.
Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, I hear the gentleman, and the gentleman says spending is the problem. If spending is the problem, and spending obviously is one of the challenges we confront, as is revenues, if that is the case, then let me remind the gentleman that during the time that his party was totally in charge of spending, spending increased very substantially, otherwise known as 86% increase from 2001 to 2008 in the national debt. 86% increase. Now, under Ronald Reagan, it increased 189%. Under this president, it's increased 41%. And he confronted the deepest recession as a result of the economic policies in part pursued in the last administration, which I did not support and which my party did not support. So if you want to get into this, I hear this about spending all the time. We had a pay-as-you-go bipartisan process in place, put in place by George Bush the first and Democrats in 1990. In 1993, that pay-as-you-go was continued. In 1997, a deal between Mr. Gingrich and Mr. Clinton continued that pay-as-you-go process. And for 4 years in a row, the last 4 years of the Clinton administration, we didn't borrow a single additional nickel to raise the debt limit. We didn't have to. Why? Because we were paying for what we bought. Now, Republicans were in charge of the House and the Senate for part of that time. And so they deserve some of the responsibility for that. And the President was in charge of signing bills and in making sure that we made investments. And he made sure we did that. And the economy exploded. Those three factors obviously resulted in the only president in the lifetime of either the Majority Leader or myself who ended up with a net surplus in his term. So we don't need to be lectured about spending. As I said, spending does not cause debt. What causes debt is not paying for the spending you make. And that's exactly what happened, I tell my friend, when his party was in charge from 2001 to 2006. Totally and essentially till 2008, because we didn't change any economic policies and President Bush had to sign any bill that was passed here. This circuitous discussion we have about simply spending is the problem, yes, you're right. But the problem is, ultimately, if we want to buy things, and what we're doing now, as the gentleman knows, is we are producing a product that costs $23 to produce, and we're asking people to pay $15 for it. Talk about small businesses. Any small business does that goes out of business pretty quickly. That's what we're doing. And we have to stop it. The debt ceiling, however, the gentleman knows, is about that which we have already done and whether we're going to pay those bills. And all I'm saying is we ought not to make that the part of the leveraging between our two parties. Let me go quickly to the Farm Bill, Violence Against Women Act, and the Sandy Supplemental. Can the gentleman tell me which of those three, if any, might we see next week?
As the gentleman knows, on the Farm Bill, we are committed to trying to address the issue of the Farm Bill prior to leaving for the year. As far as the Violence Against Women's Act, as the gentleman knows, I'm in discussions with the Vice President. I know it is of particular interest to him. There are many members on our side who I've met with today, as well as members of the other body who are interested as well. And we have met and we're trying to work out the differences. I'm committed to do all I can, as the gentleman knows, to bring this to a conclusion so we can see its passage. As far as the supplemental bill, I know that the White House, and the gentleman's heard me say this before, has submitted its request. Our Appropriations Committee is doing its review of the request to see that that supplemental aid gets to the victims that need it, to the localities and the states that need it, and is money that will be spent directly as a result of the very catastrophic storm of Sandy, and hope to be able to resolve that as well. We are operating in an environment post-Budget Control Act where we have put in place budget mechanisms for disasters. As the gentleman knows, FEMA has indicated that it has the money it needs to operate at least for a little while, but we are committed to making sure that adequate funding does get to the victims of that very catastrophic storm. And I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his intent there. I simply observed that the gentleman observed, and he was correct, obviously, that FEMA indicated it has some resources to go through the beginning of the year. There are, as the gentleman well knows, a myriad number of agencies that will be involved in helping the victims of Sandy that do not have those resources and need them, and I appreciate, therefore, the gentleman's focusing on this and trying to bring this forth as quickly as possible. Last, the miscellaneous tariff bill. I know a number of people that expires, as you know, on the December 31st as well. Can the gentleman give me a view as to where that stands?
I think the gentleman is aware, Mr. Speaker, that the chairman of the committee, Chairman Camp, is speaking with the ranking member to try and see what it is that we can do to go forward on that issue as well.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I yield back the balance of my time. Sorry, Leonard.
What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at noon on Monday next for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
So ordered. From Iowa. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Latham, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
I thank the Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous materials for the record on the topic of my special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, those of us from Iowa and elsewhere would like to recognize today the service of my fellow Iowan, Congressman Leonard Boswell, who will be leaving the House at the adjournment of this Congress. I first want to thank him for his 20 years of service to our great nation in the U.S. Army. No one has done more to secure our freedom and the promise of a bright future than our veterans and military personnel. I know that Leonard counts his efforts to secure additional support for military families and veterans as among his most meaningful achievements. I also want to recognize the gentleman from Iowa for his time in public service as a legislator. His distinguished career traces back to the Iowa State Senate, where he once served as president of that body. Although we haven't always agreed on issues before us, Leonard's relationships with his fellow members have enabled him to work with colleagues of all political stripes. His work on behalf of his constituents has exemplified what Iowans expect their representatives in Congress, someone who is approachable, thoughtful, and hardworking. I appreciate the many years of service Leonard Boswell has provided to our home state of Iowa and its people. I know that he will continue to serve his fellow Iowans faithfully beyond the conclusion of this Congress, and in that I truly wish him and his family the very, very best. Mr. Speaker, in addition to my remarks today, I asked Iowans to pay tribute to Leonard by providing their comments for submission into the congressional record. We did not have the luxury of time to read the numerous notes and well wishes that came in, but I'd like to highlight a few of those at this time. Iowa Governor Terry Branstad sent the following. I commend Congressman Leonard Boswell for his longtime dedication to public service. His selfless service to others has been demonstrated in many ways as an officer in the United States Army, as President of the Iowa Senate, and as a congressman from Iowa. Congressman Boswell should be proud of his public service and accomplishments, for his personal achievements as a husband, father, and grandfather. I'm heartened by Iowans like Congressman Boswell, who have spent a lifetime serving the state of Iowa. We thank him for his service. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley wrote, Representative Boswell has worked hard to represent his constituents. He did his job very well. While we disagreed politically, we never had a personal disagreement. We found plenty of common ground. I'll miss his camaraderie around Congress. But I have no doubt we'll run across each other because Representative Boswell is unlikely to avoid public service, which has been his calling for so long. Thank you for your service, Representative Boswell. Nancy Williams, president of AIB College of Business in Des Moines, wrote, I wish to recognize and thank Congressman Boswell for his dedication to our country, to Iowa, and to his constituents. He has changed our world, our country, and our state with his personal service for so many years. Every life has a great purpose, and Congressman Boswell has had a wonderful calling for his. I will wait in anticipation to see what he chooses to do next. I just cannot thank him enough. Ken Sager, president of the Iowa Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO, wrote, Congressman Boswell was a representative who would take the time to listen to Iowans. He paid special care and attention to all veterans. He was a friend of working people. When home visiting, he would make an effort to meet with the labor leaders in the state. He spent his time listening to their concerns and would give honest answers on his positions, not always to the liking of the unions, but always honest and upfront. And John Murphy, Director of Government Affairs at PolicyWorks, sums up the assurances we all have that Leonard will continue to serve his state and nation. I'd like to thank Congressman Boswell not only for his support of me personally, but also for his service to our country. As a soldier and statesman, there are few people who have given more of themselves to our nation. I wish him and Dodie well as they move forward in their next adventure in life. I would ask them to take some time and get some rest. But I know that won't happen. That's not the Boswell way. Mr. Speaker, at this point, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Loebsack.
Well, thank you, Tom. My colleague Tom Latham from Iowa. I'll just start out by saying that this is my sixth year here in Congress, and just finishing it up. And this is only the third time that I've actually come to the floor during special orders to speak. That's how important it is for me to do this. The first time was when I was arguing for Boeing to get the tanker deal, when that was a big issue before our country. The second time was when I was pushing hard to make sure that the Stock Act was passed so that members could not trade on insider knowledge. And now I'm here for Leonard Boswell, my good friend Leonard Boswell. It's not that I don't come to the floor very much. I do speak for bills, what have you, but not during special orders. This is only the third time, and it's with very good reason. I also want to note at the outset here, too, how many members of the Iowa delegation are here, including a former member, Jim Nussel. It is really fantastic that you're here today, Jim. This is really an honor for Leonard, I think, to say the least, that you're here. And this is just absolutely very special. When you say special orders, Mr. Speaker, it applies in this case. I didn't know Leonard Boswell very well when I first got elected in 2006. I knew him, but not very well. I was not an elected official before I got elected in 2006, but I had been involved in politics in Democratic Party politics for a number of years, helping other folks get elected. Leonard and I think it's fair to say that when I got elected, probably, and I think he would say this, I think he would admit this, that neither one of us had any idea what good friends we would become over the years. Leonard has been very helpful for me to sort of help me navigate the ways of this chamber, the ways of Washington, the ways of Congress, something that I think everybody knows is a challenge, whether you've been in a state legislature or any kind of legislative body prior to coming to the Congress. It is a challenge to get to know how to operate in this environment. But Leonard's been very, very good for me. And I appreciate everything he has done. I could talk about his military service and all these other things that Congressman Latham just mentioned, but I'm not going to go through that except to say that I'm on armed services. I've never served in the military myself. I have 2 Marine children with whom we're going to be spending Christmas again this year, no matter what the Congress decides to do and what the President and Speaker Boehner decide to do. We're with them to honor them and to honor our military this Christmas. But Leonard has a distinguished past in the military. There's absolutely no doubt about that. One other thing I'll say about Leonard Boswell. We talk about a lot of us being from Iowa, but I often refer to Leonard Boswell as being of Iowa. He's an Iowan true and true in every possible way. And I think those of us who are from Iowa know exactly what I'm talking about. The rest of you, I'll explain it to you at some point if you so desire. But it is very important that Leonard Boswell is of Iowa. I've had a wonderful time serving with him these 6 years. We're not going to lose touch. I do have 6 of his former counties, including his home county of Decatur County now, and look forward to staying in touch with him, getting more advice from Leonard as we go forward. He's a font of wisdom and advice for those of us who need it here in this body. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you especially, Congressman Latham, for organizing this. I think that tells us something about what can happen if we put our minds to it on the larger issues of getting this country back on its feet. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And thank you, Leonard Boswell, for your wonderful service. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. I, too, want to recognize Congressman Nussel here on the floor in honor of Congressman Boswell, and we have the distinguished minority whip, Mr. Hoyer.
I thank my friend for yielding, and I'll be brief. I had the privilege many years ago to get on the telephone and call Leonard Boswell. Leonard Boswell was then presiding over the state Senate. He tells the story about how his executive assistant came on the floor and said, there's a guy named Congressman Hoyer on the phone. Shall I tell him you'll call him back? And fortunately for me, President Boswell at the time said, no, I'll talk to him now. And he turned the podium over to one of his colleagues and came on the phone and talked to me. And I said, Senator, this is Steny Hoyer. I would very much like you to run for Congress. We think you'd be an excellent member of Congress. We think you'd be a great candidate for Congress. And we think you could win this seat. And he said, well, what's Mr. Gephardt think about that? Well, it so happened Dick was about 4 feet from me. So I said, well, let me turn this over to him, and he'll tell you what he thinks about it. And, of course, he echoed my comments. Now, I didn't know Leonard Boswell at the time, but I had heard wonderful things about Leonard Boswell, not only about his skill as a legislator, but as his decency and his character as a human being. Not only his experiences in war, but his service at home as a farmer, as a businessman, as a public representative, and as a Senate leader in Iowa. And I want to say that nothing that has transpired over the years that he and I have served together in this body have disabused in any way the extraordinarily positive things that were told to me of Leonard Boswell and why I ought to ask him to come to the Congress of the United States. He has been a dear and close friend of mine every day he has served. He will remain a dear and close friend of mine until he and I pass from this earth. He is a salt-of-the-earth human being. He is someone that the American people, if they knew personally, would say is the kind of person they wanted representing them in the Congress of the United States or, frankly, in any other body. Leonard Boswell, thank you. Thank you for serving our country so well, so courageously, so ably, so conscientiously, with so much character and decency. You have brought a greater degree of civility and understanding to this institution. It is better for your service. Godspeed.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Congressman King.
I thank the gentleman from Iowa for leading this discussion to have an opportunity to say some things about my friend Leonard Boswell across the floor. And I reflect upon a number of things. In 1996, I aspired to run for the Iowa Senate. I got there just as Leonard Boswell was elected to come here to the United States Congress. And I got to know a little bit about the area that he came from and traveled down in that a good number of times. And little did I know that a few years later I would arrive here in this United States Congress, some 6 years later, representing not Congressman Boswell, not Lieutenant Colonel Boswell, but his cows. And I have stopped along a number of times and looked across the landscape, and I wonder what makes a man the man that he is. And coming from Iowa, especially rural Iowa, and growing up in the hills like I did, and walking through those hills and working in that soil and having my hands on a lot of things that are the origins of new wealth, you understand what makes a man who he is when you see the landscape that he came from. And that landscape down there in Decatur County, it's a little hilly, it raises a lot of grass. We, where I come from, don't always think it's the best corn ground, but they're doing better down there with the new hybrids. And so now I'm seeing that the character of the man that served in this Congress these years, these 16 years, and served in the United States Army for, I believe, 20 years, the character of the man that took the controls of helicopters time after time as an assault helicopter pilot in Vietnam, was formed and shaped in the hills that today I have the privilege to represent and that feed those cows that wander out there in that pasture land that won't probably as often go down into that neighborhood to check on, but I'm glad to know that Congressman Leonard Boswell will have some time to check on those cows because I know he loves them and takes care of them. I also had the privilege of making the trip to go to Vietnam as Congressman Boswell was going back to Vietnam for the first time since the end of his second deployment there. And he asked me if I would sit in front behind the glass with him as we went all around Vietnam, through Saigon, out through the streets of Saigon, out into the countryside, out on a boat on the Mekong River. And as we looked at how the country had changed and the population of Saigon had gone from 1 million to 7 million during that interim period of time, since Leonard so nobly, bravely, and patriotically flew over that landscape. And everybody that he served with didn't come back, but more people came back because of Leonard Boswell, and I know that. And I heard some of those stories because I pulled a few of them out, but it's not something that he's brought out front, not something that he's worn on his sleeve. It's something within the character of the man that sits here with us today. And it's part of the character of the man that served Iowans and Americans in the United States Congress these 16 years. And for this time I've had the privilege to serve with him, a decade for me. I'm grateful for those times. We've always been able to work together and served on the Ag Committee together all of that time. And there's been a certain communication that has gone on that was often unspoken, even in committee, when we look over across at each other and somehow Leonard Boswell would know what I was thinking, and I think I knew what he was thinking, and that worked pretty good for Iowans, and it worked pretty good for Americans, and it worked pretty good for agriculture. So I congratulate you, Leonard Boswell, on your service to our country all of these years. It's been a stellar career, and it's not over. There's a future also of service that I know will continue every day. And I'll keep you in my prayers and in our memories here as I thank you for serving the United States of America and serving here in the United States Congress and serving Iowans the way that you have. And I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. Braley.
Thank the gentleman for yielding and for organizing this well-deserved tribute to my friend, my colleague, my mentor, and my hero, Leonard Boswell. Now, we've been talking about how Leonard is Iowa through and through, but Leonard, the secret is out. You were born in Missouri. And That was a great day for America, but I think that it has also been part of shaping the person you are, because you know that we are much more than the state we come from, the region we come from, and everything about your life of public service has reflected that. Leonard grew up on farms in both Ringgold and Decatur counties, and amazingly was drafted into the Army on his 22nd birthday. Quite a birthday present. He served with distinction for 20 years, but the people who know him best can tell you that one of the things that made Leonard Boswell unique was he went from a draftee serving at the lowest levels of the Army to being encouraged to go to officers' candidate school. And what happens when you get commissioned is you actually have to resign from the United States Army in order to be commissioned. And Leonard did that and was commissioned as a second lieutenant on February 19th of 1957. Seems like a long time ago. But after his commissioning as an officer, you've heard how Leonard served 2 tours as a helicopter assault pilot in Vietnam. And Leonard, I know from doing a lot of interviews with Vietnam veterans for the Library of Congress's Oral History Project that everyone remembers that first day when they arrived in Vietnam. And for you, that was on April 12th of 1965. And I'm sure that you can tell us the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feelings you had when you arrived there. One of the things that Leonard never talks about, because he's too modest of a person, is the fact that he was awarded not 1, but 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses for his bravery and heroism serving our country in Vietnam. On November 1st of 1968, on his second tour of duty, Leonard became the Assault Helicopter Company commander for the 336 and led that unit with distinction until he finally retired and came back to the state that he loved and started pursuing other things. But Leonard has always been about service to country, service to family, and service to his faith. And so when an opportunity presented itself, he ran for office in Iowa, was elected to the Iowa Senate, became Senate President in Iowa in 1992, and then continued his career here, and we've heard the Minority Whip talk about how that all came about, and we are so glad that it did. Leonard has always been a strong advocate for military families. He has a lot of proud achievements in this body, but Leonard, to me, your proudest moment was when the Joshua Omvig Suicide Prevention Act was passed in the House, passed into the Senate, and signed into law by the President. And the reason why that was so meaningful to me personally is I knew Joshua Omvig's family long before he took his life. And for you to take up that cause and to give voice to the thousands of Americans who were losing loved ones to suicide, who had served this country with honor and distinction, was the cause you were meant to lead. And to me, that day when we passed the bill in the House floor was one of the highlights of my career in Congress, because one miraculous thing happened that day. After you stood and talked about why we needed to do more for veterans like Josh Omvig to help them before they got to that point of taking their own lives, an extraordinary thing happened. After you spoke, members on both sides of the aisle came down to the well and told the stories of constituents from their district who did the same thing that Josh Omvig did and put a human face on this crisis that was damaging our country. And that happened because of you, Leonard. And I have never been prouder of you. I've never been prouder of your leadership than the day that happened, and America owes you a grateful thanks for leading the charge and giving voice to that problem. But Leonard's courage and heroism just doesn't apply to his service to his country. Not long ago, when an intruder attacked his home and his family, Leonard was there to stand up and protect them as well. And you shrug it off, Leonard, but everybody who knows you knows that the outcome of that horrible moment was inevitable, that truth and justice were going to triumph because you were the one who was there at the right time and the right place. We are honored to have the privilege of serving with you. We wish you and Dodie and your entire family the best. Don't be a stranger. We're counting on you to continue to inspire us, and may God go with you.
Thank you, Mr. Braley. I'd like to now recognize the representative from Northern Missouri, Mr. Graves.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize the distinguished service of my neighbor to the north, Congressman Leonard Boswell. And it was just pointed out, he was born in the Missouri's 6th Congressional District, which is the district I represent, in Harrison County. I think that's a fact that has probably dogged him throughout his career in Iowa politics, but we're very happy to have him actually born there. But I got to know Leonard through his hard work on matters related to aviation. And as been pointed out today, Leonard is obviously a former military helicopter pilot, but he later got his fixed-wing license, and most recently he's been flying a Comanche and a Zenith, but he's been a great advocate for all of general aviation. You know, I've worked with him on countless pieces of legislation, large and small, to advance the interests of general aviation. In the FAA reauthorization, which we just finished this year, or the parts of last year, there was an important provision in it to allow residential through-the-fence agreements at general aviation airports. And this provision would not have survived the process without Leonard's efforts. He's been a leader in opposing user fees, which is one of the #1 issues to those of us in general aviation and to general aviation pilots, and ensuring the continuation of programs such as the Block Aircraft Registration Program. He has been an instrumental voice and established something that's very important to me, and that's the General Aviation Caucus, and he's been very instrumental in the process of getting over 190 members, which is one of the largest caucuses here in the House of Representatives. And whenever I needed somebody to have courage to stand up for good policy, even when it wasn't necessarily good politics, Leonard was always there, and I could always count on him to stand with me on those issues. I was also thrilled that Congressman Boswell attended the greatest little air show in the country, which is in my hometown of Tarkio, Missouri. And he has come there as a friend and obviously an aviation enthusiast, but hopefully he will join us again this year, July 13th, for the show. Leonard has served his country in uniform and obviously is a member of this House of Representatives, and he's served capably and very honorably. And on behalf of general aviation enthusiasts across this nation, I want to thank you for everything that you have done to help those folks out, and it's been an honor to work with you, and it's an honor for me to be able to call you my friend. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back, and thank you very much, Leonard.
Thank you, gentlemen.